Hello. This is the RPG Pundit, final boss in internet shitlords. And I gotta say, it's hard to do a video today for a couple of reasons. The first is because of, there's all this other stuff going on in the world. You have Antifa people beating journalists half to death, and most of the American left cheering them on for it and stuff like that. And sometimes I'm like, well, do I really need to make a video about like meta mechanics in RPG design? Like, is that what people are going to want to hear? Or are they going to want me to hear me talking about that other stuff? So why don't you let me know, right? Like, if you actually want me to talk more about in the news political videos in the same way that people like the Quartering do or stuff like that, then say so. If you don't want me to, if you think that you'd rather that I stick to talking about, to following the course as I've been doing it right now, which is, I talk about games and I talk about controversy, including political controversy, but always sticking to the context of RPGs, then let me know that instead. But if you think I should just go off the reservation sometimes, and if there's something big going on, I mean, I've done it, I think, once, really, in the entire channel's history, so which was after the midterm elections. But tell me what you think. And the other reason I was lazy about doing this video is that right now, where I am, it is colder than a witch's tit. It is an absolute fantasy, I guess, that people have, that everywhere in South America is always hot all the time, except maybe like if you're, one of those rugby teams that crashes in the mountains, right? But everywhere else is supposed to always be hot. That's not true. And, I'm Canadian by birth, right? So I am used to cold weather. But after a while, you get a bit desensitized, right? And right now, it's pretty much the middle of winter. July and August are the winter months down here. And right now, here, it is 5, and I mean like here in this room, because, buildings in South America don't really bother with insulation. It's like 5 degrees Celsius. Okay, that's about 40 Fahrenheit for you Americans, right? So it is cold for me, right? Especially feeling indoors. Like if I put on my jacket, I go outside, then it doesn't really matter, right? Like, I mean, as a Canadian, I've trudged outside, 5 blocks in minus 30 weather, right? But here at 5 degrees indoors, where, without the benefit of insulation, it's pretty intense, right? So I'm cooking up some heating bags and stuff like that, and you'll see me bundled up. Well, wait, what you see of me. But okay, here we are, and let's get to the video. If you decide to, please share this video if you think it's worthwhile, because that's the best way to promote me. And if you want to support me, you can check out my games and stuff. They're in the description. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the like button, because all of that helps. It's a big way to support me and to help me get going and building up my subscriber count and making this channel more successful. Any little bit of that helps, and I'm very grateful to everybody who does it. Today, I'm going to talk about, well, the title subject is the humanity mechanic in Cyberpunk and other problematic stuff, or something like that, right? Now, it might seem strange then that I'm showing you on the cover here Dungeon Crawl Classics, one of my favorite OSR games, and this game over here, this is Raiders of Riley, which is it's a Cthulhu derivative game that I helped create. I was one of the senior consultants on that project. It took years to come out after the Kickstarter. That wasn't my fault, but now it is out and it's really, really good. And the reason I put these two is because they also have problematic mechanics. So the thing that inspired this video was a little bit political, in that apparently, this Cyberpunk 2077 thing is happening, and you've had some SJWs, or third-wave feminists, or trans people, who decided to declare that the cybernetics rules in Cyberpunk are problematic, because if you change your body, right, then you lose humanity. Okay, so obviously, for certain people who are changing their bodies with radical doses of hormone therapy, or serious surgical intervention, they see that as offensive, because it would imply that they're less human for having done that to themselves, right? And you know what? I don't really, I don't really care, but I do. I mean, I don't care about the argument, right? But I do think that it is a bit weak sauce, right? Not the argument, but the mechanic itself. And I'm going to explain why. I've never really liked that mechanic for Cyberpunk, right? Or for other, and it's not just Cyberpunk, that game that has it, because Shadowrun has something similar. Almost every game that has some kind of beefed up cybernetic implant augmentations also have some kind of, oh my god, you'll lose your humanity sort of element to it, okay? And this isn't done for a reason that makes sense in the world. It isn't done for a reason that makes sense in the human sense. It's done in the sense of being a mechanic that mostly exists to stop your players from being assholes, right? Because in the game, we all know why this mechanic is there. This mechanic is there because if there wasn't some kind of factor that would make your character become screwed up, the more of this cyber stuff you put on, if you as the player, you'd have your character just get all of them, right? I want all the cybernetics, right? You just decide to completely eschew your body. And of course, that in a sense is unrealistic because, I'm sure that it would be, I think for most of us, if we were told, well, would you want to get rid of everything except your brain, put it into a metal robot and go around in that, and you wouldn't be able to feel anything, you'd never be able to, smell a roast beef again, and you'd never, your sexual performance would be gone, you wouldn't be able to touch anything, you wouldn't be able to hug your kids and feel it, not all those things would be gone, but you'd have badass rockets and a 27 armor class. A normal person wouldn't do that, right? But in the game, the player will do that to their character. So how do we stop it? We create a kind of humanity mechanic. At the same time, though, the humanity mechanic doesn't really reflect what ought to be going on there, right? Because what should happen is that people should have some kind of inherent humanity. You should make the player role play their character, understanding the reluctance of what they stand to lose, and in most cases, unless they're playing a complete psychopath, would have serious issues with getting rid of major body parts in order to, get some kind of advantage, be it, mechanical or whatnot, right? So this is what I call a meta mechanic. It's a game rule that is pretty much just set up to make a limit on the player otherwise being able to abuse a given situation, right? It's like if in D&D you say, well, if you mix potions, right, then they won't work or they'll have a negative effect, right? So that you don't have a guy just pumping up on potions. But it's, with potions, at least in old school D&D, you had to go to the dungeon to buy them, right? Anytime you get something where there's limits in the game, and the limits aren't based on what's realistic in the world, but are mostly just based on making sure a player doesn't get too much power too fast, that's a meta mechanic, right? And sometimes these are done for other reasons, sometimes they're done because you think that's what the genre is like and it's not. And I mean, like, some people have argued with me that Cyberpunk, the genre of Cyberpunk is one where people have a sense of losing their humanity, but that's, I don't think that's, again, in any Cyberpunk, most of the Cyberpunk I've looked at, that's something that is looked at more as something that's front-loaded or something that's looked at from outside of the person, right? That other people see that person as less than human for what they've done, right? So that's something you could have as a very interesting mechanic, is that somebody who's just got way too much cyberware on them obviously end up becoming social pariahs, and that can have negative effects, as long as you're not just running a game that's all about fighting, right? Like, if you're running a game that requires that people interact with other people, then that's something you can do. Right. So what I'm saying is a bit of criticism of game design and suggestions for people when they're designing their own games. If you're making your own game, be careful that your rules are made to reflect your world and your world is made to reflect your rules. okay? And what I mean is an example of that. If you look at Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? In Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is an OSR, an old school variant of Dungeons and Dragons, but that has been given a lot of cool gonzo twists. In this game, and one of the differences from regular D&D is that you don't just memorize spells. You have a list of spells, and every time you're going to cast a spell, you do a spell check. And if the spell check fails, you can't cast it again for the day. That's if you're a wizard. If you're a cleric, though, what happens is that every time you fail a spell, it means that you've had some kind of divine disapproval. And so that means that there's this threshold of disapproval. At the start of the day, it's 1, right? Like if you roll a natural 1 on a d20, you get the actual divine punishment for casting wrong. But if every time you fail a prayer spell, that number goes up by 1 point. And then at the end of the day, it goes away. And the next day, you start back at 1 again. So this was the mechanic that was meant to make this so that the cleric didn't have to memorize spells. He can have these numbers of spells, but so he can't just always be casting them, right? And it's a system where if you fail your roll, then God is getting pissed off at you because you're trying to pray too much or something like that. But then, okay, there's the problem, right? Like, why would, unless you had a crazy God, why would your God be pissed off if you're a religious... I mean, I have a bit of experience in stuff like religion and the history of religion. And, you know, pretty much what gods want is constant devotion, right? You never see a story of like some Christian saint or some Hindu monk or something like that that is going around and facing all these terrible problems, and then he prays and then God fixes it, but then the next time he prays, God gets pissed off at him because he prayed too much, right? And punishes him in some way. Right? As long as what the person is praying for is godly, right, then it goes well for him. In fact, there's a ton of stories in both Christianity and Hinduism and some other religions, but especially those two. Those are two I'm most familiar with in this context anyways, where you have some kind of saint, right, a saint or an acharya, whatever you want to call it, that wander around and face all these difficulties in their life, but every time they remember to pray to God or to the Virgin or to Ganesh or to, you know, the Mataji or to Krishna or whatever, right? They pray and the problem gets resolved by miracle, right? In fact, Autobiography of a Yogi, one of the best-selling books of the 20th century, it's pretty much just that. It's the story of this dude who supposedly, you know, had all these things that he did in his life, and at every point when there's a huge problem, all of his friends would suddenly abandon their faith because they ran into a problem, but the yogi would pray and he would have faith, and then a miracle would happen and everything would be fixed, right? And his friends would always forget the next time, right? But anyway, that seems like, you know, that's how gods want you to be, right? So what in DCC, you have a setup where you can be doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, right? Like you could be a cleric of the god of protecting children, and you're trying to cast a spell that's going to save children's lives, but if you roll badly on the die, nope, God will just punish you, the children will die, and you'll get punished because the roll said so, right? Like that's the other example of a meta mechanic. It's a mechanic that doesn't reflect the world, okay? Unless you change your world to be that. In my DCC campaign, there is only one god, and the one god is an insane computer. So it's a computer that has random flaws, and that means that it makes sense. The mechanic works perfectly then, right? If your god is a mad machine, right, and it's pretty much a crapshoot whether or not he's going to listen to you, then that's fine. That'll work, right? But in the DCC system would work terribly if your gods were resembling anything like most normal gods of normal human societies, okay? And another example I've got from Raiders of R'lyeh there, in the Cthulhu-type games, you often see these sanity mechanics. And sanity mechanics are done kind of as like hit points of the mind, right? Because in any of the Cthulhu mythos type games, you run into horrifying things and it drives you crazy, right? And as you wear it, you're worn down by the horror and you know, that's not totally against the genre, and it's not really unrealistic, right? Now, the way that those mechanics are handled are still handled pretty much like they were just hit points, right? So you have to do a kind of a saving throw, which is a sanity check. If you fail, you lose X number of points. If you succeed, you either don't lose anything or you lose a lot less, right? And that's fine, but it does sometimes, again, create situations where you are hitting up against things that you've already encountered before or stuff like that, and that it you know, you can have the most steely-eyed of characters, and suddenly in one bad moment, in one bad roll, he just flips. You know, like he's fought Great Cthulhu, but then he runs into, I don't know, a werewolf, and that freaks him the hell out, and then he's, you know, he's done, he's dead, right? So this is a meta mechanic in the sense that it is, you know, not necessarily really reflective of the threat there, right? Now, you could say, well, what about combat? That's about the same, right? Except that in combat, you know, it's somebody is stabbing you with a sword, right? So somebody stabbing you with a sword, you know the damage that's going to do, right? And so if somebody's attacking you with a knife versus if someone's firing a missile at you, the damage is going to be different and proportional, right? Whereas with sanity mechanics, what you end up sometimes having is a situation where a person can face something that is supposed to be really, really horrific and just fluke out and get lucky and not really be affected by it for some reason. And then that same character could theoretically face something that is a lot less horrific and completely lose it. Right, so that's not really the same as what you get with combat mechanics, because with combat mechanics, sure, a dagger might be really lucky and kill you, or it might do a little damage, but either way, it's a dagger. It's something that's capable of doing a certain range of damage. But in the question of sanity, like if you've been stabbed first by a two-handed sword, and then later you get stabbed by a dagger. The fact you were stabbed by a two-handed sword doesn't mean the dagger isn't going to hurt you, right? Or that the dagger will hurt you any less. But with sanity mechanics, there isn't really that element in a lot of cases. I mean, I know that there's been house rules that have been made and stuff like that where there are sometimes rules. I believe in Call of Cthulhu from like 5th edition onward, there's rules about how repeated encounters of the exact same thing or creature can control your sanity, right? Can reduce your sanity loss, right? But encounters with different creatures, where certain creatures should be completely, you know, world-shattering, and then, you know, once you've found the world-shattering creature, probably you should be immune to anything after that, right? Like, you know, if you run into aliens, right? Like you find aliens out in the woods one day, then after that, if you like, you know, if you get, I don't know, Dutch people moving in next to you, you shouldn't really be freaked out about having Dutch people moving next to you, right? One would think. So, so in Raiders of Riley, what we have is this rationality and irrationality mechanic, which works very similar in many ways to the sanity mechanic, but what it affects is instead of saying, you know, just directly going to the question of sanity, it affects your whole perspective of the world and whether you view the world through a rational or irrational lens. So it affects how immune you are to things not making any sense, or rather, how resistant you are to things not making any sense. And, well, basically, the point of this video is really as a tip to people who are making, who are planning to make mechanics. And when you're making mechanics, something I don't think is a good idea, something that you shouldn't do. Now, mind you, all the games I've mentioned are very successful games, right? So this doesn't necessarily mean that you can you can't get away with it. But I think it's cleverer to find ways to make mechanics that are based on the world and that aren't about trying to restrict your players or trying to create effects that don't necessarily reflect how things should go in the immersive process, right? Don't do it just for the sake of having, you know, these set limits, or rather figure out other ways to create limitations, right? The punishment for for casting a clerical spell wrong shouldn't be dependent on your role. It should be dependent, or it should be heavily modified at least, by whether what you're doing aligns with what your god is all about or doesn't, right? And then you can play around with that, right? Or, you know, by whether the gods will it or don't will it, right? But not based on a random roll most of the time, right? Your cyberpunk cybernetics shouldn't be something that drive you crazy and make you less human. Probably less human people will be more willing to take on cybernetics, right? And people around you, the more cybernetics you have, might look at you with more fear, disgust, loathing, or whatever, right? And you will be alienated by them, not within yourself as some kind of psychological thing necessarily, right? Like, I don't think a person right now, you know, if someone has, you know, has a mechanical arm, right? If someone's a war veteran or something like that, they're probably traumatized by a whole lot of stuff, including the loss of their arm. But the presence of a cybernetic arm, let's call it that, right? Of a mechanical arm to replace the arm that they lost is, if anything, probably humanizing for them, I would think, right? It gives them back a little bit of what they've lost, right? So, you know, this is how you have to think about it. Now, obviously, one way you shouldn't think about it is, oh, is this going to be correct according to identity politics demands? That's obviously something you shouldn't give a crap about. So that's it for today. I hope you liked the video. I tried to be less political than usual, I guess, than the last couple of videos. But I'm sure I'm going to make up for that this Sunday, because this Sunday I am either doing an episode of Inappropriate Characters with Venger and Grim Jim, if the stars are right, in which case you will catch me on that channel on Sunday. But if that doesn't happen, I promise to you, my viewers, that I will do a live stream on this channel where we'll be talking about all kinds of things, including whatever damn subjects you want to bring up, right? And of course, whatever crazy thing is happening in the world of RPGs or the world in general by then. So be sure to check it out one way or the other. It'll either be on this channel or the Inappropriate Characters channel. So if you're not subscribed to this channel, subscribe. And if you're not subscribed to Inappropriate Characters, go subscribe to it. You're going to love it. And one way or the other, it's going to be at 7:30 Central Standard Time. Okay, just so it doesn't complicate anything. So thanks again. And again, if you want to give me a little tip, check out my RPG products: Lion and Dragon, Cults of Chaos, Dark Albion, Arrows of Indra, Lords of Olympus, and also my PDF series, RPG Pundit Presents. The current RPG Pundit Presents that'll probably be out right now, or is about to come out, is an adventure called Thralls of the Jade Queen, which is a crazy Gonzo adventure, the sort of stuff that goes well with Gonzo OSR gaming. It's a fun adventure, a funny adventure. It involves a conspiracy, an extraplanar locale, so you can very easily bring your characters over there, and a bunch of death matches in a gladiatorial arena, or an escape attempt, and lots of interesting NPCs. So be sure to check it out. I'm sure you won't be disappointed. If Gonzo gaming isn't your thing, then check out the one right before that, which is like 100 strange features or unique features for villages and towns, which is a set of 100 random, random, or you can pick them, characteristics from real history and folklore that involve curious features that you could put into any town or village your characters travel to in your campaign. And if those two don't do it for you, check out any of the 80 other RPG Pundit Presents issues. They all range in price from like 99 cents to, I think, $3.99. And so it's like you're giving me a tip for doing the videos, and you're also giving yourself a reward in the form of a product that might be useful to your campaigning. Be sure to check that out. And most of all, share this video. Share all my videos. Share any videos you thought are worth sharing at least, because that's one of the best ways to spread the word and increase the viewership. Thank you very much to everyone who's watched, and thank you especially to everyone who's subscribed and shared. And I guess we'll see you next time. Currently smoking Lorenzetti Half Volcano plus Cornell and Deal's Morning Drive.